All right, we're going to start tonight. Our speaker tonight, he is the most dangerous man in Colorado. He will get you banned if you're not careful. He is Dr. Rich Guggenheim, and he is talking about the end of DEI. Give it up for Rich.
I think I was that dangerous. By the way, I think we all live and learn, right? I know I am also Colorado's favorite transphobe, so there's that. So I'm going to just start off by letting you all know 1312 passed. Who here is surprised? Nobody? Oh my gosh. You guys. So if you weren't following that, everybody's like, man, that's terrible. There's a silver lining on every cloud and a pot of gold at the end of every rainbow. Unless you're mean, then apparently that rainbow just keeps moving as you chase it. 710 people signed up on that bill to testify. And of those 700, over 500 of those people were in opposition. That is a record for the most people to ever sign up to testify on a bill in Colorado history. Over 100,000 emails were sent to senators at the state capitol, and over 20,000 phone calls were received by the Senate Minority Office. So that, to me, signifies a pretty big movement that has finally taken root. And I think that that's an important thing to remember, that for so long, a lot of people have just been kind of like, I don't want to get involved in the culture war. And I'm like out here, I'm like, where are the parents? In case you didn't know, I'm gay and none of my kids ever live. Some of you got that. Some of you you'll figure it out tomorrow morning when you're on the toilet. So here's another piece that I want to let you know about. Elizio, you can send this off to Congressman Evans. It's House Resolution 1866, titled the Guaranteeing Unalienable and Anatomical Rights for Dependents Act, GUARD Act. I don't know why does government always have to have acronyms for stuff?
Pelosi was fun. Pelosi Act.
Yes, that was fun.
I work for government, so I am just like, what does that mean? It could mean one of any number of things. Was introduced by Representative Harriet Hagman. Any of you know who she is?
Yep.
I love her. She's up in Wyoming. She is badass. Like, seriously, I like her a lot. And a couple of other co-sponsors. And it proposes amendments to the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, CAPTA. So here's the proposal of the bill. The GUARD Act aims to, and I have been pushing this for a minute after 1312 was passed. The GUARD Act aims to disqualify any state from receiving federal funding under CAPTA if the state takes adverse action or discriminates against parents, guardians, or legal representatives who oppose medical, surgical, pharmacological, or psychological treatments, clothing, name or pronoun changes, or other social practices. These provisions specifically pertain to actions related to affirming a minor's gender identity when that identity is inconsistent with the minor's biological sex as determined at or before birth. The bill's emphasis is that it applies regardless of any medical diagnosis, including gender dysphoria or related conditions. And then this will be coming up on X pretty soon. There's an image of Colorado with House Bill 1312. See where we're going with this one? And the enforcement mechanism. The bill allows parents, guardians, or legal representatives who believe, this is literally going to be my X post on Gays Against Groomers. The bill allows parents, guardians, or legal representatives who believe they have been discriminated against under such state policies, such as those proposed in Colorado HB 25-1312, to file a lawsuit in federal or state court and can seek to enjoin the Department of Health and Human Services from continuing to provide CAPTA funds to the state, require the state to return any funds received in violation they proposed in these proposed visions. In essence, the GUARD Act seeks to protect parental rights by ensuring that states cannot penalize parents for opposing gender-affirming treatments or social transitions for children and complying with federal funds. So this is something that I really, as you know, travel to Washington, D.C., travel up to Wyoming when it's not snowing, which sometimes it's not in Denver, but it is in Cheyenne. So this is a thing that we're taking direct aim against Colorado at the federal level with this act. So if we can try to get our representatives in DC on 1866. That'd be awesome. So, thank you. I'm also going to show you the testimony from the other night. It was pretty spicy at first. Gays Against Groomers didn't even want to post it because they thought it was too spicy for even them. I'm like, wow, shoot, dang, like, how do I offend gays against groomers? I mean, in a 2-minute speech, I took everybody out in one fell swoop.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Rich Guggenheim, I'm here as the Director of Legislation for Gays Against Groomers to urge you to vote no on HB 1312. For the past 2 years, I have traveled across Colorado and the nation, speaking with hundreds of Republican legislators and Republican members of Congress, and I can count the number of times on one hand that I have ever had one of them tell me they want to take my rights as a gay man away. Instead, almost universally, they say, we don't care what consenting adults do. Leave the children alone. I have tried to warn this body and the larger LGBTIQA plus community that pushing a radical trans queer agenda targeting children is causing public support for LGBT rights. Rights we fought hard to win to collapse. Rather than listen, many here chose to malign and in true fascist form silence me, labeling uncomfortable truths as disrespectful in the people's house. Now with HB 1312, my worst fears have come true. Like radical trans queer activists, they also seek to impose their cult's values on everyone else. Tonight, history will remember the Democrats who helped catalyze the destruction of hard-won rights for gays and lesbians. By advancing the Marxist agenda of trans queer activists and targeting children, you have betrayed the gays and lesbians you represent. I urge you, see the bigger picture, understand what's at stake, and vote no on HB 1312.
The agenda that is driving this. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more than the 2 minutes you were provided? Dr. Guggenheim.
Thank you, Senator Frizzell. Yes, this agenda, when you look at the bigger picture of it, you have bill sponsors in the lower chamber who intentionally left out key voices of stakeholders and then referred to those who oppose this piece of legislation as, quote, Nazis, KKK, and bigots. And they labeled parents, myself, and organizations like Gays Against Groomers as hate groups. And they malign us because they know that the agenda of mutilating and sterilizing children is purely indefensible. And so they seek to defame and discredit us because they know that that's the only way they have to advance this agenda is to silence people like the very leadership of this committee has done. And so in the act of silencing those who refuse to conform to these rules regarding speech, this bill does the same thing. It silences those who refuse to comply with the mandates of the state, and it will send those children to state-run camps. This is exactly what the Nazis did. The Nazis also sterilized children. And this makes complete sense when you understand that the bill sponsors and the bill authors are self-proclaimed socialists.
I don't want to drop this one. That will hurt everybody's ears. That's really, the essence of it is where it is. And I have to say, we had so many people sign up to testify, and at the end of the day, it wasn't anything that any one person or one organization did. I think it's just a matter of people coming together around an issue that affects all of us. And I've been saying for a long time, I've heard a lot of people say, I don't want to get involved in the culture war, right? Well, why do I disagree with that? Culture is upstream of politics. And if we want to change the political landscape in Colorado, we've got to change we got to change the culture of Colorado. And as someone who is a lifelong Coloradan and was born in Colorado, I can tell you the biggest change in Colorado has not been the influx on Californians. It was not the legalization of marijuana. It was the change in culture. And so we got to fight that. And this is the beginning of that. And one of the ways that we do that is through the concept of DEI. And I hope to spend a little bit of time talking about DEI tonight. I don't know what that thing is. So when we talk about DEI, one of the things that I think a lot of people have this misunderstanding of is President Trump signed this executive order and now DEI is done and it's all great and wonderful. And it's like, no, it's not the case. Executive order has a few limitations. One of the things is he can only control the purse strings, essentially. There's limited enforcement mechanisms. And the other thing is a court can overturn it. We're already seeing a number of legal challenges in the court systems, especially with some of the lower courts, imposing injunctions and stopping some of President Trump's executive orders from taking place. And of course, the other thing that we know is President Trump is only going to be in office for another 3.5 years. And what's going to happen after he's not in office? Well, the next president could easily come in and undo all of those executive orders. So we need something a little bit more permanent. And when we talk about this, it's important to understand how these policies across the country are evolving and what their impacts are. So when we talk about this, I love AI now. I mean, I can come up with this awesome, sweet, generated picture, right? Like you got DC opposing Colorado, and then who's in the middle of it and who's caught in the middle of all of that is us poor saps down here on the ground, right? So we've got these federal actions that are impacting DEI. Across the country, there's different state level legislative trends that we've seen. And then of course, we have to understand that federal action and state and local action is going to impact businesses, it's going to impact organizations, it's going to impact you and I. And what does that look like? By the way, you can ask questions. So what is DEI? Well, it's really, it is 3 words: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I can tell you as a state employee, I got to spend 40 whole whopping hours doing DEI training. And I had this fancy little trophy that says I'm an inclusive leader. And I don't know what that means. But diversity is a representation of different identities. And one of the things that I find most ironic about this concept of diversity is it really is, let's get a bunch of people who all look differently into the same room, but all think exactly the same. Like, it really is a brainwashing session. That's what it is. It's about assimilation, it's about conformity, it's about compliance. It's not about actual individual thought and bringing those individual perspectives and values to the table to enhance an organization or a group's performance. Then we also have equity, which is the fair treatment, access, and opportunity. And at the end of the day, you probably have seen some of those things where like it's like a little cartoon and there's like a boy in a wheelchair and like someone that's like really short and another person, and they're all like standing on different blocks and it's all equity. Well, really, let me put this a different way. From each according to his ability to each according to as he has, right? It is socialism. And so then the other one is inclusion, and that's creating environments where all individuals feel welcomed and valued. And I love to point out that it is the LGBT OMG WTF plus community that is probably the biggest hypocrites amongst the entire population of when it comes to being inclusive. If you do not think, dress, act, vote the same kind of way that they expect you to vote, then you're not welcome in the community. And it is really ironic, like a lot of people don't understand, like it's not just politics. I mean, how many of you heard about my story with the Buddies, the gay bar over here, or Trade, the gay bar down on Santa Fe? That was Parasol Patrol, by the way. They sent out a petition online to get me banned from their bar. So those, if you don't assimilate and you don't conform, you're really not welcome. And they have this paradox of being exclusive and intolerant of people who are not inclusive and tolerant. So I'm like, well, that is some mental gymnastics right there. But at the end of the day, there's another word for that, and it's called hypocrisy. So I like to say that, but you know, if you even, before you even get to that level of it, if you've ever been on like any of these dating apps, like there are dating apps for gays and lesbians also, like Tinder, but you'll see these things that it's like no fats, no femmes, no twinks, no bears. If you don't know what that means, talk to me afterwards. But it's like all of these things that you're looking for. And if you're not willing to, if you don't fall into these specific narrow categories, and that is somebody that you're not even willing to talk to. So that's kind of really crazy to me, because to me, you know, when I was growing up, it was like I grew up down near the res. Like the res, man. Like we didn't have like a res, we had reses, like Navajo, Ute Mountain, Apache, and they are not all the same. Don't dare confuse them either, because they will let you know about it. So, and then, you know, I grew up, for those of you who didn't know, it was LDS. I went on a mission. I went on a mission to New York City, and then I was like, holy crap, they're not all Mexican, even though they all have brown skin, right? Like, this is where you get cultured and you learn. But so I grew up valuing that. But most importantly, I think one of the most important things when we talk about inclusion and creating environments where all individuals feel welcomed and valued, and we talk about this diversity as a representation of different identities, the most important identity that we have is our capacity to think for ourselves and have our own free thought, because that's where our identity is born. And unfortunately, DEI just kind of washes all of that away and distills it out, and what you're left with is just kind of this mindless automaton who's willing to go along with a political agenda. And corporations are doing the same thing. And that's why this is ultimately dangerous. And like I said, the claim is that it enhances innovation, decision-making, and reflects societal values. But like societal values, when you get back to this conformity and this homogeny in thought, whose societal values are you actually representing and reflecting? And I think one of the clear classic examples of that we can look to is 1312 when they did stakeholding, right? And who did they leave out? Everybody that wasn't trans. And so what did that lead to? That led to a record number of phone calls, a record number of emails, and a record number of people signing up to testify on a bill that ultimately was amended 13 times. A well-stakeholded bill isn't amended that much. So that's one of the things that we're seeing is this is being billed as something, but doesn't accomplish those objectives in the real world. Ooh, I keep forgetting that I do have audio in this. So the executive order, how many of you got to watch this speech from President Trump? I'll play it. Can I make this larger? I don't know, I'm not smart with technology.
The tyranny of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion policies all across the entire federal government and indeed the private sector and our military. And our country will be woke no longer. We believe that whether you are a doctor, an accountant, a lawyer, or an air traffic controller, you should be hired and promoted based on skill and competence, not race or gender. Very important. You should be hired based on merit. And the Supreme Court, in a brave and very powerful decision, has allowed us to do so. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have removed the poison of critical race theory from our public schools, and I signed an order making it the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
I want to pause real quick right there. Today I was at the title board. If you've never had that amazing opportunity, I just pack some patience. So I filed the paperwork today when we had our first hearing. We got Title II ballot initiative number 70, which will keep boys out of males out of girls' sports. We almost didn't get title to it, and let me explain why. Some of you heard the story earlier. When I was at the title board, I have Scott Gessler as my legal counsel on this one, so it's a lot easier to get things done this time because, you're not going to pull the wool over Scott Gessler's eyes. But they didn't want to give us title because one of the people on the title board said, well, male and female is more than one subject, and it could confuse Colorado voters. Yeah, I'm not joking. Yeah, I had the same response as you guys. I was like, what the? I don't even need to see what's down there. I know the difference between a male. I knew that the 6 trans activists that were in the room are all, like Jax, were all female. Yeah. And my Prius is a Maserati. So his initiative, as you heard when he talked about DEI, there's a few things that are all kind of caught up, and DEI is very much kind of like my dining room table. It's a catch-all for whatever kind of crap you can throw on it, right? And so he started off by banning it, and that these things are being taught in public schools, and it's like the federal workplace, the state workplace. I mean, we actually have a diversity, equity, and inclusion office with the state of Colorado, and it's all housed, and it's like we're paying for this, and state employees are required to take this training, and there's like this whole thing about hiring, like we have to go through all this hiring practices, and we're supposed to have parity, and then when I look around, I'm like, how do you force parity with racial identities and gender identities and all of this stuff when they're not even applying to the job? And then we're like doing special outreach to these communities to get them to apply for the job. And then they apply to the job. And I'm like, bro, couldn't even write a resume. Like, I don't know what language that was, but it was like it was written by a 4-year-old, you know? And like, of course, they don't give you any of the personally identifiable information. So we don't know what's actually behind all of that. But really, it's kind of like the basement is flooding right now, is the way I look at this. And I think we have to understand what's happening in the workplace with the government and what's happening in schools also, because the DEI isn't also just about what's being taught in the curriculum. It's about who's being hired into these teaching positions. So, you know, people like Jax and Z, those are the same people that are teaching your children. So, the impact this executive order had was that there are a lot of DEI staff positions across the federal government terminated. And I will tell you, as someone who works with the state government, I haven't seen it at the state government, but as someone who works with a lot of the federal government offices, I can actually understand what these people are saying now. And I don't mean that because, like, to sound racist, but what happens ultimately is these people in these federal positions are getting hired to meet DEI quotas, and then they didn't have the skills. And they didn't have the, like me, I'm a scientist, right? So when I'm talking about things, I expect to be able to talk to a colleague who should be at the same level or above me, and they should know exactly what I'm talking about, and they don't have that capacity or that capability. So for me, I think that we're seeing a lot of those people let go, and now what they're doing is they're starting to backfill those positions with people who actually do have something we'll get into in a minute called MEI. So the other thing that I would say about this is a lot of these DEI positions that we saw across the private sector and across the government sector were huge financial pits. And corporations started to realize that they're dumping millions and millions of dollars into DEI initiatives and training in hopes of advancing this corporate cause so that most likely they could get on the HRC's Equality Index report and have a good score. But what happened was they didn't see that return on that investment. And they started to see performance decline. So when they started letting these initiatives go, what they started to see was they were filling these positions with people who were based on merit, and the performance increased and the productivity increased. So there's some issues there. Legislatively, I track stuff like this with Gays Against Groomers. There were 137 bills in 26 states targeting DEI and related initiatives this year alone. So I say that, you know, a lot of these states, and you can kind of see where they were on this map, the darker oranges, were states that passed anti-DEI legislation. The lighter oranges are the ones where we introduced it, but it died. And then, of course, the yellow ones, there's a couple of them, they didn't even touch the subject. So these legislations in limiting DEI programs in public schools and colleges were the biggest areas that I saw this legislation passed in the states. So I think it's really, there's a lot of hope. But what this does is now you can see now there's a patchwork and a quilt work of laws that basically regulate DEI. Can you imagine being a national corporation trying to navigate that legislative legal landscape right now? It's got to be a nightmare, and it's probably especially taxing in HR suites right now. What I can say, though, is there are companies like Amazon, Meta, and McDonald's that have rolled back these DEI initiatives. I'd like to thank ChatGPT for creating this image for me of the companies that have rolled it back. It got Walmart wrong, but hey, not all bad. But then there are companies on the other side of this, like Marriott, surprisingly, that's doubling down on DEI initiatives. And Disney has, they're not necessarily doubling down or doing away with it. They're rebranding it. So they're changing the vernacular, and they're saying it's something different when really it's not. So educational events and protests are breaking out across the country right now. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this cancel DEI stuff is, if you're ever up in Fort Collins, like some of you probably are from time to time, wow, talk about crazy up there. So this is a news story from CSU of all places, our land-grant university. And land-grant universities used to be conservative strongholds. And that's because the land-grant university was always the A&M school, and the A&M school was agriculture and mechanics. So agriculture and engineering was what that stood for. And so these were really strong, and they were born out of Abraham Lincoln's era. He was the one who created the land-grant university. This is a protest up there, a news story from it, from Woke Denver 7.
Protests erupted at Colorado State University today as students rallied to protect their DEI programs from President Trump's new federal funding deadline. He's demanding schools end those initiatives or face financial penalties.
Denver 7's Christian Lopez spoke with students concerned for their peers and the future of their education.
Students we talked to here at Colorado State University tell us that these DEI programs, classes, and resources are the reason they've been able to get through the last few years here at the university, and they're worried about all of these going away.
Yes, DEI!
Last week, the U.S. Department of Education published a letter threatening to revoke federal funding for schools and universities that do not remove diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Students we talked to say that letter misguidedly claims that DEI programs are race-conscious practices. They tell us that these classes, programs, and departments are all a crucial part of their education.
You could possibly see students who are not able to complete college. They could drop out despite having paid a large amount in tuition already. It's been a lot to process. You know, I've gone to classes and people have been crying because they don't know if they will be able to graduate, right? Because their major might be taken away.
We don't like your attitude!
CSU says it is closely monitoring changes in federal policies and administrative actions, and said they're analyzing the possible impacts on their university community. CSU says it will continue to communicate with their community and will always prioritize their students, faculty, and staff. Reporting in Fort Collins.
Oh my gosh, she's gonna not be able to come to college anymore. Girl, what are you gonna do when you have to get a real job? Work at Starbucks? So I think one of the things, like I said, there are a lot of these programs are actually being rebranded. Like I think this one was Portland up in Oregon rebranded it as belonging, respect, and fairness. Whatever the hell that means. It's all word salad at this point in time, right? So they probably took lessons from Kamala Harris. So that's where they're going with a lot of the stuff, is they're just rebranding it. They're not actually phasing it out. And so I think it's really important to understand that. It's not going away in a lot of the blue states. So that's because DEI initiatives and a lot of these policies really are a states' rights issue. And I'm all in favor of states' rights issues and states' rights, and not a big federal government telling me how to live my life. But the downside to that is then we have to understand that now, instead of trying to take out one giant dragon, we're playing with a whack-a-mole game. And so now we've got all these different states. And so I've seen a lot of the red states continue to push and ban these things, whereas a lot of the blue states are like, no, we're going to uphold this. And I can just see like where Julie Gonzalez and Lorena Garcia are going to take this in Colorado, right? I mean, we already know. And that's why they're putting away money to try and take on the federal government and sue, because they don't want to give this stuff up. Because some of them might actually have to get a job. So, to me, it's cheating. If you can't cut it in the real world and you have to rely on DEI programs and DEI initiatives to fake it till you make it, then, well, I don't know. Like, the real world's going to hurt real hard. And girl, I want to tell you what, like, even with someone who actually did earn his way, as a privileged white male through college and through his whole entire career. Like, it's still hard. So, it's going to be a thing. Compliance is going to be challenging, navigating these varying state laws and these federal directives. I am so glad I don't own a business. I mean, can you imagine if you did own a business in Colorado and the legislature came down like, no, you have to do this, but then you got the federal government saying like, no, you're not allowed to do this? What do? Hope you got a good set of lawyers on your team, probably, because that's where it's going to go. And then you got to think about the strategic considerations. You're going to have to, what are your organization's values? What are your personal values? What are your values that you hold dear? And how are you going to incorporate that into how you do things with these legal requirements? And I put this picture up here of McClucky, and the governor behind her and Monica, because really what this comes down to, again, is engaging with the stakeholders, whether you're legislative, whether you're a corporation, whether you're an organization, you're going to have to take that time to engage with your stakeholders. And the question that I pose in this situation is, do you trust Colorado legislature to actually engage in stakeholder processes? I don't. And I say that as someone who's supposed to be doing it. I don't think that it's fair. I don't think it's equitable what they're doing, because they're going to cherry pick who they have on these commissions. They're going to cherry pick who they invite to the table to have their voices heard. And so it's going to be very biased. In summary, the future of DEI really in the US, it's very uncertain. We don't know where these executive orders are going to go in 3.5 years. We see a decline in it. I think there are a lot of corporations that are starting to realize that there is no value in it. There's declining returning on investment on that. And the corporate culture is in a state of flux as well, because on the other side of that, like I said, you got the others that are doubling down on it, or they're rebranding it so that they can still keep those government grants that come into those corporations or organizations. And then I think that one of the things that I would say, taking away from all of this, is because it's in such a state of flux, the most important person in the room that can help fight and put an end to DEI is you as an individual. Make your voices heard, show up to the Capitol and testify. You might say like, man, Rich, why would I show up to the Capitol and testify? 1312 showed me how effective that is. It was effective. It would not have been amended 13 times if it wasn't for the fact that 710 people showed up to testify on that bill. So absolutely, make your voice heard. At work, I have to sit through these god-awful meetings. And let me tell you something, man, I sit there and I have a heterosexual white man who openly admits that he's privileged, pontificate about privilege and pontificate about all of this DEI stuff. I tell him, like, look, as a gay man, I totally disagree with you. And I'm probably the only gay man that's ever going to tell you this. But when you start having gay people push back on this nonsense, you as a straight white man probably need to shut your mouth and start listening and ask some questions. Like, seriously. And so we all have that same ability. We all have that same power. Ask those questions and push back on the narrative. It's going to make you unpopular, but what are they going to do? At the end of the day, the only way this changes is for us to make our voices heard. And, the other thing that I would say, like, I'm a stakeholder. I'm also a shareholder in some of these corporations. How many of you own stock? How many of you ever get the ballot or the invitation to go attend the shareholder meetings? If you do, show up and speak up so that you can change the corporate culture as well as the political culture. It's a culture warfare because, as I said earlier, culture is upstream of politics, and that's how we change it. So I don't know how much time I was supposed to prepare for, but what questions you have? Who knew that I was Peter Pan when I worked for Disney? Now you know.
You like dressed up as it?
I was a character. It's also why I'm like, I will never have children. So they can come out of a child I have born it, including the mom.
Questions?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it would be nice if after my question you could recap what the bill says. Like, I know, but it would be nice if you could recap what the past bill now mandates. And the second one, I was not aware that it was some sort of a federal legislation to kind of ban this. And with a forward that I 100% agree with your thesis here. As state right, we need to follow the principle. And so while I disagree with all of it, if that's the way Colorado wants to be, should the feds be involved? Like, because it could backfire. Like in case of abortion, I think, in my personal opinion, it was good that the federal government got out of the way. Do we want to make the same mistake or let, unfortunately, Colorado be Colorado?
My thought about this is, honestly, if you embrace true libertarian values, then the federal government should not be involved with this at all. And with that said, at all, that also means that we should not be funding it. And so I would absolutely support the ending of federal funds for any corporation, any nonprofit, or any government organization that's going to implement DEI policies and practices. If you want to do it as a corporation, fund it on your own. So that's where I would go with it. I do also, I think a lot of these federal government things, we got to be careful when we start telling people and we start usurping states' rights. Because like you said, that could backfire. And we don't know, because this is just an executive order, a series of executive orders, where this will go after he's not in office anymore. And what concerns me is we could push really hard on this DEI stuff, and we could push really hard on gender ideology stuff at the federal level and make a lot of progress, and then watch him leave office, and there could be a huge blowback and the pendulum could swing the other direction. And instead of making progress, we would actually have lost ground in the end. So I think it's really, one of the things that I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not also a Trump, I'm not Trump derangement syndrome. I'm like, good policy is good policy, bad policy is bad policy. And sometimes I think one of the problems we have to understand is TDS doesn't just stand for Trump derangement syndrome, it stands for Trump disciple syndrome. And we have to be able to criticize our leaders and our elected representatives and hold them accountable. And one of the things that I wish he would do sometimes is just stop running his damn mouth. Like, he goes too far sometimes. I'm like, bro, like, I understand where you're trying to go, but shut up. Like, let's think this through. Like, some of the stuff that he was doing with Doge, I was like, hey, like, yeah, I'm all about that, but sometimes a scalpel is more effective than a chainsaw. It is true, but I think that a lot of people, there wasn't a strategy behind it, and it was just, we're going to go balls to the wall. And when you go balls to the wall, two things happen: you wind up burning out quickly, and the other thing that winds up happening is you can wind up giving away your entire game plan to the opposition, and then they're going to know in the midterm, if they take Congress, they know how to fight because we've played our cards. And so I think we have to be really, really careful about what we're doing with all of this DEI initiative stuff and all of this gender ideology stuff. And I think one of the things that I would encourage people to understand is we're in this for the long haul, and you got to keep your eye on the long game, because this is not something we're going to win in 3.5 years. Why? What I've been saying all along is this is a culture, and we got to change the culture, not policy.
Oh, I just had a remark about that video of Fort Collins. It's amazing. I saw a whole lot of people with like face masks. What do you think is the relationship there between the mask and the fact they're against rolling back DEI?
Formative years for brain development happened while they were locked down during COVID. Did that sound like Charlie Kirk?
Since you work for the state, have you noticed a preference in hiring for people who put pronouns on their resumes?
Not with me.
Not with you, but like if you were applying for a position, do you think you would do better if you put he, him?
The state, I'll tell you, I don't actually see it, and I have gotten in trouble with the state. They tried putting me on a corrective action plan because I made an X post actually on my personal X account that said that I would not hire someone who identified as that. And they put me on a corrective action plan, and then I hired a lawyer, and I told my HR director and my boss, I was like, you better make damn sure that if you decide to pursue this, it's legally defensible, because I would love for nothing more than to sue the shit out of the state of Colorado and retire at 45. And my boss was like, Rich, that's completely inappropriate and unprofessional. I'm like, what's inappropriate and unprofessional is the fact that we're even having this conversation. And you know something, ever since I did file that federal lawsuit, they don't touch me anymore.
Thank you. When you started your talk, you talked about what Colorado was like when we were growing up here, and the culture that was there. Have you seen any ways of conversing or ways of engaging that is effective in reaching people who maybe have been swept up in some of this DEI stuff and have not really just thought through what are the implications of this for our culture, or to kind of help come back from that?
You know, I said earlier I also served in LDS missions, so I like to say that I've left one cult, joined another cult, and now left that cult to join another cult. So, no offense if you're LDS or you grew up in a conservative Christian household, but there's terminology that we use for a lot of people who are PMO Mormons, we call them. They're physically in, mentally out. And we also refer to a phrase called the shelf cracking. And, when you're out there on a mission, you hear a lot of what is called anti-Mormon. Now, let's just say the same thing and call it anti-trans, right? You hear a lot of it. And you get exposed to it, and you are so ingrained in your beliefs and the culture. I think that's a common theme tonight. And so you hear this, and you kick back against it, and you want your first reaction is to attack back, right? Because you do feel like you're being attacked. I would say that it's a lot of the same stuff. The parallels between leaving the LDS Church and what I see in the TQIA plus cult are astonishing, because it is a cult. Keep speaking the truth. Don't back down on that, and be compassionate and be kind. Because one of the things you have to understand is you never know, it could be a feather that caused that entire shelf to come cracking and smashing down, right? But I believe that at some point in time, every single person in the trans queer cult is going to have a day of reckoning. And I think at some point in time, maybe 20 years from now, the truth is going to be exposed, and they're all going to be like, oh, F. We need to be building those off-ramps for them right now. And the way we do that is we show them kindness and we show them compassion. Because in that amount of time, you think about the fact that there is going to be an entire generation of tens of thousands of young, mutilated and sterilized people who are going to be absolutely disowned by the TQIA community. And they aren't going to have support networks, because especially in places like Colorado, the laws require affirmation. They're not going to have people to turn to, because they aren't going to have anybody that's going to say, welcome back. They're going to be the proverbial prodigal son. And it is up to us to create an environment where they can come back to us and say, man, I am so glad that you're here and that you welcome me and you accept me for who I am, and you can understand the trauma, because there's going to be an awful lot of trauma that they are going to have to unpack. And we need to be those people who care for them, and we need to actually show love and compassion for them.
Rich, I want to know from a litigation standpoint what you're seeing nationally regarding DIA. Are you seeing many lawsuits out there? And I'm kind of curious if you have any hope for their success, particularly if there's any litigation out there that might be trying to attack DEI at the state level. And then locally with Colorado, do you know if this thing passes? And I'm assuming that Polis decides that he's going to go ahead and let it sign. He's either going to sign it or just go ahead and let it pass. I personally don't think he's going to veto this one like he has a couple others. So I'm kind of curious if you've heard about any local lawsuits that might happen on the state level as well against 1309 and 1312.
I can't say a whole lot about conversations that I've had, but I will tell you, I had a conversation with the president, Pam Bondi and Candace Jackson, Linda McMahon's executive director of executive council. And I did instruct the president to take the same approach that he took in Maine, working for the Department of Agriculture in Colorado. I even told the commissioner, I sent her an email this weekend, and I said, I have a meeting with these people, and I'm going to instruct them to take the same approach that he took with Maine and withhold USDA funding. Like, it's my job. I'm willing to put my job on the line for this stuff. And I think the farmers in Colorado are also willing to do the same thing, because at the end of the day, we have an obligation to protect our children. And I will tell you, I think there are going to be a number of school administrators, there's going to be a number of churches, because that bill 1312 affects you in Liberty in the Rocks, because you would have to comply with their edict to use gender affirming language. You know, it is a complete egregious violation of the First Amendment. And I think that we need, and I said this on an X space that I did a couple nights ago, we need this bill to pass. And we need someone to say, fuck that. I'm not going to go along with your delusions, and I'm not going to comply with this. And if you force it on me, I'm going to sue. Because we need those people with standing. And we need that to move up through the court, because what eventually happens, and I think this will happen over the next 5 years. It's going to be a long haul. Same with Senate Bill 3. We'll get these people with standing, and there can be multiple peoples with standing based on different versions of the rights that were violated. 14th Amendment for parental rights, First Amendment for parents, Article 4 of the Constitution with the full faith and credit clause. Those people come together and they enjoin and they take it to the Supreme Court, and then we create law through the judicial system. And I think that's one of the most important things that we have to understand, is that third branch of the government is so important. And when we keep fighting these things at the Capitol all the time, trust me, I am burned out. I am so tired. It's gonna die today, guys. So, we have to have these bills passed. We have to have these people litigate them, because that's how we fight them, and that's how we create protections across the country. As far as, are there any laws that I'm aware of right now? I don't think so. I haven't heard any. So it's going to be a slow process. And unfortunately, our circuit court right here is pretty left-leaning. So it's going to take a while through a lot of appeals and a lot of money and financial and emotional investment into this kind of stuff.
3 more.
So with the gender mutilation of children, a lot of the issues that we discussed that are objectively wrong and horrific here, there's an enormous amount of money behind it into transitioning children and then detransitioning children. There's an enormous amount of money to the medical industrial complex there, which to me, that's the biggest obstacle. And do you see any way to overcome that obstacle, or what do you think we can do there?
Man, how many of you heard about the NIH report that came out this last week? Almost immediately that report comes out, and it's a systematic review of gender affirming care and here in the United States. And almost immediately, the American Academy of Pediatrics denounces it. And the same thing happened with Human Rights Campaign. And here's what's interesting is when you read the response to it, it isn't actually a response of, well, here's why we think maybe the methods were flawed, or here's why we think that maybe this study shouldn't have been included, or that study should have been included. It was literally like, no, these people deserve to become lifelong dependents of the pharmacological industry. That's it. That really is it. And anybody who speaks out against this agenda, they malign and they attack and they smear. In fact, that was one of the things that I said the other day at the Capitol. 9 News showed up for the rally, and I was like, oh, 9 News is here. And I said to the lady, I was like, I can't wait to see how you smear this like shit on a sidewalk. And she wouldn't interview me, and I'm like, that's actually fine with me, because I don't want to talk to Kyle Clark anyway.
Hey, Rich, really appreciate everything you do. Awesome. Great job this year, really getting the word out there and fighting the good fight. But you mentioned earlier a little bit about how the law requires affirmation. And I had heard the term conversion therapy years ago, not really knowing what it means, but it's basically like illegal in many instances in Colorado. Can you explain kind of a little bit about how that whole thing works?
Oh, sure, because I'm actually part of an amicus brief on a Supreme Court case out of Colorado on this very subject. So conversion therapy 5 years ago, before this law was passed, really the idea before the trans concept came to be was If you were gay, you would go through what's called conversion therapy, and there are various forms of that ranged anywhere from like the ice pick back in the 1940s and the frontal lobotomy, all the way through to pray the gay away, which is now trans the gay away, to electroshock therapy and different forms of therapy like that. And so they have banned that. And then along came the trans industrial complex is what I like to call it. And they combined conversion therapy with if a person wants to detransition. And so to me, the conversion therapy is actually the act of transitioning, not detransitioning. To me, detransitioning is reconciling with your natal sex and making peace with who you actually are. But that is considered a form of conversion therapy to detransition. So a person in Colorado is not allowed to detransition. The law requires the medical industry and the psychological medical people, all of it, the whole thing has to affirm that person, when they say I'm trans, they have to affirm that psychologically and medically. If they want to detransition, they're not allowed to say anything about that. So that person is left on their own. So going again back to what I said, we have to become that support network for those people, because there's not going to be anything for them when they decide to give up the fight.
Last question. So first of all, could you address a little bit the incentives for doctors and how that plays out for them transitioning kids in the state, and in conjunction with that, the Boulder summer camp?
So yes, when we talk about that, the incentive is really the Affordable Care Act also put in there coverage for gender affirming care is what they call it. So if you're an insurance industry, you have to pay for it. I think that was brilliant. I think that the modern day gender affirming care medical industrial complex, this is their new opioid crisis. This is their new gravy train, because it's about $1 million per patient over the course of their lifetime for gender affirming care that the pharmaceutical and the medical industry is making off of that. So there's huge incentive to keep pushing this. And if you ever go back to John Money and read anything about with John Money, he actually said that the ideal age to start the children on this path is before the age of 3. So that's why you see Skittles, a group in Fort Collins, targeting children as young as 2. And this is also why transitioning, bad pun, to the sex summer camp that they were doing up at the University of Colorado, Boulder, they were hosting this with 5th graders, because they're trying to get these people into that pipeline, the trans pipeline, as young as possible. And ideally before puberty, especially Tanner stage 2. And so that's what the puberty blockers are for. And that's where a lot of the money comes into it, because they know that a vast majority, almost 97% of the children who socially transition will go on to medically transition. And that starts at that age with the puberty blockers. And then about 18 months later goes on to the hormones. And they're on those hormones for the rest of their life. And then ultimately, once they turn 18, in a lot of cases, we see that there is a 7-fold increase between the ages of 18 and 24, where they're going through with the surgeries. And that's where you're seeing the double mastectomies, you're seeing the vaginoplasties, the phalloplasties, and the things like that. And that, to me, is why when I wrote the legislation for banning gender affirming care on minors, I actually put it at the age of 26. And a lot of people are like, why 26? 3 reasons. 1, the data shows that there is a 7-fold increase in the transition rate. 2, your prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop until you're 25. And 3, you're still on your parents' insurance under the ACA until you're 26. So legislatively and statutorily, there is a there.
That's our talk. Give it up for Rich.
Thank you, everyone.